Today we are going to change the coolant on our Triumph Modern Classic, specifically our 2020 Speed Twin. Triumph calls for coolant changes every 3 years, and according to the manual for this bike, and I assume others is the same vintage, Triumph specifies HDX HOAT coolant. That no longer exists. Wanting to make sure I got the best coolant for this specific bike and avoiding the guessing games, I headed to the Triumph dealer and bought their brand of coolant, D2053 OAT. If you want to dive into the details of coolant, you can check out my article linked in the description. I'll spare you that for now, but I guess the pendulum has swung back in the favor of organic stuff again. Let's get into the process, shall we? Be forewarned, it's more complicated than it has a right to be. The first thing you'll need to do is remove the coolant reservoir cover using an 8mm socket for the cover bolts. Next, we need to siphon out the contents of the reservoir. Thought that was harder than necessary? Lol. Stay tuned. There is no way to access the radiator cap of this bike without removing the tank, unless you have some freaky Cirque du Soleil moves. Start by removing the seat and the side cover. Remove the bolt connecting the tank to the subframe. Have a block of wood handy to prop up the back of the tank. Something about 6 to 9 inches will work, preferably a bit wider than the subframe for stability. Lift the back of the tank up while pulling it back an inch or two. Remove the tank breather hose from the rollover valve and pull the hose through the frame, noting its path. If you have a bobber or a Speedmaster, you'll need to remove the hose from under the tank. Go to the right side and note the routing of the wires in the fuel line. Remove the 2 wire connectors from their mounting tabs and then separate them. Next, we need to remove the fuel line. Have a rag handy to catch the small amount of gasoline that will dribble out. Slide the clip at the base of the connector forward, then pinch the tabs on each side of the fuel line connector and lift it up. At this point, you have the tank completely disconnected from the rest of the bike. Prepare a soft surface to set the tank on, then slide it further backwards and lift it off the bike. Obviously, the more fuel you have in it, the heavier it's going to be. You're going to get good at this. If you also ran your USB cable over the engine, this is a good opportunity to tidy that up by zip tying it to the wiring loom. Be sure to keep it away from the rubber tank mounts though. Now you can finally remove the radiator cap. Surely there's a petcock for draining the radiator. Of course not! Loosen the lower radiator hose clamp and slide it up the hose. Then pry the hose off. This will allow the coolant to go everywhere. Some of it may even end up in your drain pan. Now you can flush your radiator with water. Not much of this will stay in your bike's cooling system, so tap water is just fine to use. A couple gallons is entirely sufficient. You want to get as much of the old coolant out as possible, especially if you're changing the type of coolant being used. Reattach the radiator hose and slide the clamp back into place. This is a tedious process because the hose is so damn short. We want to raise the radiator fill cap a bit over the top of the radiator, so we need to lift the back of the bike a bit. Be sure to check your coolant to see if it is pre-mixed or if it requires dilution with deionized water. Yes, I said deionized. Again, look at the article in the link for more info on that. It is so much easier to get pre-mixed, so I do that whenever possible. Using a funnel, pour the coolant into the radiator inlet until full. The system requires 1.5 liters total. Squeeze the radiator hose several times. This will circulate the coolant and work out most of the bubbles trapped in the system. Top it off as necessary and repeat. We will further recirculate the coolant by removing the bike from its stand and shaking it about. You may be tempted to stir the bike. Remember, it's British. It must be shaken. Give the hose another couple squeezes and top off the coolant. Some coolant should have entered the reservoir by now. Add more until it reaches the top fill line and replace the reservoir cap. Replace the radiator cap. Time to replace the fuel tank. Get your block ready and set the tank on the bike, then prop up the back. Connect the fuel line and the wire connectors on the right side. No need to route them back into their original positions. We're going to be doing this again. You'll need to pinch both buttons on the fuel line to get it back on, just like you did when you removed it. Connect the breather tube. Again, you don't need to reroute it. Now fire up the bike and let it run for a while. Give it several decent revs to around 4 or 5K and then let it sit for a while. Go through the whole tank removal process again. Yay! Once the engine is cooled off a bit, slowly remove the radiator cap and check the coolant level. Top it off if necessary. Replace the tank yet again. This time you do need to reroute the breather hose, wires, and fuel line back to their original position. And hang the connectors from their perches. Be sure to slide the clip on the fuel line back into its original position. Replace the tank bolt and torque to 8 Newton meters. If you have a bobber or Speedmaster, torque it to 30 Newton meters. Reattach the breather hose to the tip-over valve. Reattach the reservoir cover. Torque those bolts to 8 Newton meters. There, you did it. Triumph probably didn't need to make you do all that, but it does look good, and you probably know a lot more about your bike than you did before, and you saved yourself a few bucks in the process. Please like the video and subscribe to my channel. That really helps me keep generating this content. As always, ride smart.